Good morning, everybody who is connected to this webinar of the European Space Agency. My name is Norbert Hübner. I'm head of feasibility studies in the area where this Kickstart activity is issued. Participating today will be a few colleagues of mine. Tony Sefton, in charge of the activity in our department on the commercial climate services, as well as Pascal Lecomte, who is a representative of our climate change office. Before starting the presentation, I would like to make some, let's say, adjustments to the agenda because we have some technical issues. We are connected at the moment from two sides, and one of our sides has electrical blackout. Therefore, we have to shift the agenda. I will start with a short introduction how this session will be set up, and then we will first begin with the part on the commercial climate services, and then later on switch to the principal introduction of the Kickstart activity and the elements to follow for any applications. Welcome to all the participants to this webinar on the Kickstart activity commercial climate services. Before entering into further details, I would like to ask all participants to keep the microphones muted, and it's also recommended to switch off any videos because then the data transmission might be easier. For any questions that pop up during this webinar, please use the chat function that you will see in the menu, and where you can then write any type of questions already during the presentation, and we will come on later on after the first half hour to answering the questions. So it's already good to start these writing down these questions in the beginning so that we can directly go into and don't lose any time for waiting any questions. With this one, I directly will switch to my colleague Tony Sefton, who will give the introduction to the climate change part. So first switching to the slides.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. So yes, I'm Tony Sefton. I work in the countries and outreach office in the business applications area of the European Space Agency. So we put together a Kickstart activity that you will see in Norbert's later part of the presentation will open on the 24th of November and will be open until the 16th of January, covering the topic of commercial climate services. So this competition is basically aimed at identifying opportunities for commercial exploitation. Commercial exploitation of information, both space-based and ground-based, in order to develop new types of businesses. We're on slide 12, Norbert.
I can't see the slide numbers. 1 second. Which slide are we here?
I think the one before is the one you're currently showing.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. Okay, so in preparing this activity, we thought about potential topics of interest, and I go into a little bit more detail on each of these topics in a couple of slides. But the 5 main categories that we've selected are related to health, to transportation and critical infrastructure, to compliance monitoring, energy supply, food and water resources, but we do leave open the option that you might have an idea that doesn't fit directly into one of those categories. So we encourage you to still submit a proposal, providing, of course, that it still makes use of at least one type of space asset and that you can build a business case around it. So Norbert, the next slide, 13. So the background, of course, is all the work that's been done in the climate science area, leading most recently to the 5th Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report that I guess most of you are familiar with. which basically states with certainty that climate change is man-made, and that without fast action, many of the effects are likely to become irreversible. And in particular, man-made emissions of greenhouse gases such as CO2, methane, etc., are leading to rising temperatures with impact not just on the environment, but also on the global economy. So this Kickstart competition is really creating a framework for the development of commercial climate services. At the top level, some relevant opportunities might relate to assessing impact of regulations at local, regional level. In other cases, there may be opportunities not only to look at mitigating the effects of climate change, but even in local situations, possibly even exploiting rising temperatures and environmental change for particular sectors. So, next slide. So just going into a little bit more detail on each of those 5 topic areas that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Norbert, you're gone on one slide too many. Slide 14. Okay. So, for instance, in the area of health, you're probably all aware that there have been instances, I can think back 10 years ago to Paris, where a lot of elderly people died as a result of heat waves and high temperatures, usually arising from cardiovascular and respiratory disease. And also rising temperatures will exacerbate levels of ozone and other pollutants that cause further problems, particularly for the elderly. In terms of energy supply, consequences of climate change will be apparent, for instance, for identifying sites for future wind farms, where to locate power lines. For the hydropower industry, the companies will need better rainfall and climate information in order to understand the seasonal rainfall patterns and what their impact's likely to be on energy production, and the need for how often and what type of backup energy could be required. The ice cover, as you're probably all aware, is slowly diminishing in the Arctic, and in terms of energy supply, of course, that also now opens up some potential opportunities for exploitation of oil and gas resources. So for the oil and gas industry, they are now looking for long-term forecasts of ice conditions. The topic of transportation and critical infrastructure is very broad. I think we can already start to see some evidence of increased number of extreme weather events, such as the hurricanes that have been experiencing recently in the Caribbean. So potentially that can have significant impact on pretty much all our transportation systems, be it land-based, sea or air. We expect greater exposure in the future to flooding and extreme snowfall, and that will have some impact, for instance, on the life expectancy of roads. But on the other hand, of course, particularly in parts of Northern Europe, there can be cost savings and improved mobility from reduced incidences of snowfall and less frequent winter storms. On the topic of the Arctic, the fact that there's likely to be less sea ice cover means that for shipping lanes, the shipping season is likely to be extended, and there could be a reduction in shipping times. So you can see that not all the consequences commercially are necessarily bad. It's likely to be a mixture, and that's even more true perhaps in the next topic of food and water resources. So agriculture is very highly dependent on climate. We could expect an increase in crop yields in some conditions, but in other cases, increased risk of drought and floods. Heat stress can certainly increase the vulnerability of livestock to disease. Drought conditions may reduce amounts of forage. One thing that's also predicted is a change in the population of fish stocks. Basically, a lot of species of fish are likely to migrate away from the equator, away from actually where the main population centres are. But nonetheless, that will open up new opportunities in northern waters for aquaculture and fishing. And of course, in terms of availability of water resources, climate change is likely to increase water demand while at the same time shrinking supplies. So that's going to be a major issue globally in the future. The final topic is this area of compliance monitoring. So some of you are probably aware that from 2023, compliance monitoring will need to be done on a national basis for greenhouse gas emissions on a 5-yearly basis. And that will open up opportunities for the establishment of new satellite-based monitoring services. So reliable measurement of greenhouse gas emissions will enable then, for instance, direct comparability between emissions from cities, regions and countries. So next slide, Norbert. So in terms of what's possible from space, I mean, Earth observation particularly has a major role to play here for things like monitoring and change detection. That could be greenhouse gas concentrations, but also land and surface temperature, height of sea level, soil moisture, solar irradiance, the incidence of storms, extreme weather events. And of course, you can also use geodata for historical analysis and providing inputs to forecasting models. For satellite navigation, this is used in many instances of positioning and guidance, and in this particular type of activity, where you have in situ sensors that you need to geolocate. And some of you might also be aware of other possibilities of using the GNSS signal. So GNSS spectrometry can be used to provide information on sea state, ice and snow cover, white spot altimetry, and so on. And satellite communications, of course, where there's no terrestrial coverage and it's the only means of communication, but also it can be used for radio and TV broadcasts to warn public about dangerous climate-related events. And where satellite communications also comes into its own is in, for instance, disaster relief operations where the terrestrial communication infrastructure may be damaged or destroyed. So I think, Norbert, that concludes the slides particularly relevant to this topic. So I can hand back to you to now go through the outline of the Kickstart process.
Thank you, Tony, for the introduction of the subject itself. And I am starting now again from the beginning and explain to the participants now how our processes work and how any applications should be presented and what is to be respected in this matter. So first, an introduction. Kickstart activities. This is a scheme that we have implemented beginning of this year in order to enable companies that are interested in services integrating space assets to provide applications, very short applications with a maximum length of 20 pages in form of limited feasibility study up to 6 months, exploring the integration of space-based capabilities, which means services from SATCOM, satellite navigation, satellite Earth observation, like my colleague Tony explained before, into any terrestrial application field. So Kickstart activities of an instrument to assess the viability of an idea, and this comes down to assessment of the technical viability, but also of the commercial viability, because in the end, all of our activities are aiming for the implementation of sustainable operational services. With little investment by companies, both financial and manpower, I said it already before, it's short studies up to 6 months. The financial part is limited to a funding of ESA of 60,000 euro, which represents 75% of the total cost of specifically to attract small companies and startups in order to grant them an easy entry into our application programs. We are committed to a rapid evaluation process, which means that typically after closing of the activity, we aim for an evaluation within 4 weeks and for contract placement within another 6 weeks starting from the evaluation. So approximately 10 weeks after the submission date, we expect companies to have a contract in place to start the activities. As this call will close in January, 23 of January, this means that we expect activities and contracts to be placed for the beginning of April. Successful Kickstart activities can then be further developed into commercial viable businesses with follow-up support from our programs. So we have several lines of support to companies, and one of them is what is called demonstration projects, which are typically co-funded up to a level of 50%. This is our work plan for the second semester 2017. So you see we have already carried out a number of other Kickstart themes. Currently open are the one for the services for Arctic and subarctic regions and services for municipalities. And the one which are you listening now to, the commercial climate services, will be the last one in the row of this year, issued on 24th of November up to 16th of January. In case you are interested in further subjects, we are also currently coordinating with our member states the first 4 themes for this semester, first semester 2018. And information on this will follow before end of the year. What do we offer in our program? Of course, we offer the financial support. As I said before, 60,000 euro ESA funding for an activity of a maximum of 80,000 euro. Then, of course, technical and business expertise, as our activities are aiming for the implementation of commercially sustainable services. A large focus in these activities will be on the what we call viability analysis or business plan elaboration. But of course, no service can function without a proper functioning of the technical side. So the technical, where we also can provide support, especially on the aspects related to the space technologies, but of course on the aspects related to terrestrial technologies and the specific vertical market we are not that familiar with. So this is where we expect then typically also that users and customers out of this area are involved. Then what we've seen in the past, what is very helpful to companies, especially SMEs and small companies, is the ESA branding and promotion. So the ESA logo typically gives higher leverage to companies to approach customers, users in the specific market domains. Finally, we organize regularly meetings, workshops on different topics, and therefore we have a large network of companies. In our portfolio are something like more than 500 companies from all different domains, and we can connect companies also to other companies in case there is additional know-how required or if there are partnerships required. The thematic call for Kickstart activities are open to any company or organization in our member states, and here you can see 19 of our in total 22 member states which are participating to this call. On the way how to approach the delegations, I will come back to that slide. As I said before already, Kickstart activities aim at exploring the viability of new service application concepts, consolidating the user landscape. So the activities are there also to establish a relationship, a trustful relationship between the companies and the potential future users and customers, and of course also with us, with ESA, so that we can see if the companies are able to deliver what they have in mind. Kickstart activities are funded at 75% for a maximum amount of 60,000 euro. And last point, the thematic calls for Kickstart activities follows a competitive tendering procedure, which means that the evaluation criteria and associated weighting factors are published in the cover letter of the call for proposals. Directly taking a question in advance, which often comes in these webinars, we will not place only a single contract, but we are able to place as many contracts as there are good proposals succeeding in the evaluation and have a high enough mark, a high enough threshold mark. Support from national delegations. This is an important element because the availability of funding is an admissibility criteria. Proposals not supported at the closing of the thematic call will not be admitted for evaluation. What does that mean? In principle, every activity needs to be authorized by our national delegations or member states, because we draw budgets from their contributions to our program. This means that either delegations have already made available funding in advance for the thematic call, so which means that any applicant from these countries, which are shown here to be Germany, Luxembourg, and Norway, do not have to go back directly to the delegations to ask for this authorization, but can apply directly to our program. But for industries in any other country than Germany, Luxembourg, and Norway participating to our program, which was shown on the previous slide, they have to go back to the national delegations, introduce the activity, and explain to the national delegations what they want to know. The information of the contracts of the national delegations can be found on our website under business.esa.int/national-delegations. There you will find the names and counterparts of our national delegations in the individual countries. So it's recommended, in case you are interested, to contact these delegations as soon as possible, not even waiting until the call is opened, but you can already call them directly after the webinar and check with them or send an email to them if they would be interested to support a potential activity. This saves you directly efforts in the beginning in case national delegations are not supporting this call. So what does the call for proposals consist of? So the call for proposals is launched on ESA's electronic tendering system, EMITS. And you can see the link here, emits.sso.esa.int, under the announcement of opportunity number 9072. So if you are on that website, then you have to click on the left bar to a menu which is called Open Invitations to Tender. Then search for the 9072, and then you will find this call. However, to get access to the different documents here, you have to register to the EMITS website, which is typically possible within 1 day. So you should also start if you are interested, start this registration as soon as possible, and then you will get access to this documentation already now, because the call is open since beginning of the year, and you will have access to the cover letter, the draft contract, the tender conditions, the proposed template. However, the information on Appendix 1 with a specific subject of this thematic call that has been presented in the beginning of this session will only be published on 23 of November. But nevertheless, you can already familiarize yourself with the remaining documentation. So what do you need to do to submit a proposal? The submission typically takes place in ESA in electronic form, and there is a system which is called ESA Star, which is closely connected to EMITS. And also there you have to register by completing an online questionnaire on the ESA Star registration website, which is shown here, esastar-emr.sso.esa.int. There's also a manual in case you have problems to register, which gives you further information how to complete this process. On the submission itself, the content of the proposal will be limited to filling a cover letter, 1 page, and 1 to 2 pages. The proposal template with a maximum of 20 pages. And what the content of this proposal template will be shown on the next slide. Full compliance to the draft contract is a key acceptance factor, so there is no possibility to discuss any of the clauses. If you are not stating full compliance, then you are not eligible for the evaluation. The proposed template itself consists of 6 different parts, which are shown here. An executive summary, 1 page, business potential, 5 pages, technical concept, 5 pages, team and resources, 3 pages, management part, 4 pages, financial part, 2 pages. In order to facilitate and ease the procedure, we have reduced the typical ESA requirements to a minimum, which means the financial part, for example, consists of a simple table which asks for the man hours, the travel budget that you will use, external services, and any miscellaneous costs. The management part, there are a lot of standard elements included, like, for example, the planning is already given, the work package descriptions are given, the study logic is given. So what you need to do is to agree that you will carry out these activities. So it's a simple compliance statement that you need to do. So which means that the focus of the application should be on the presentation of the business potential and the technical concept. And in the outline, in the proposed template, you will see that these 2 chapters are broken down in 5 chapters where you have to provide your inputs. Maybe one point to respect, it makes sense in the part business potential when there is the question who would be the customers and users directly to come with concrete names and not just with the general descriptions. And this concludes the presentation on the administrative part. And this is the time now for you to submit your questions, and we will continue with the question and answer session. I will try to involve my colleague Tony Sefton, which is suffering from this power outage, into the questions when they are relevant for the climate change, the commercial climate part itself. Otherwise, the administrative question, any administrative questions or questions related to Kickstart's call will be answered by me directly. So let's see. We have already questions here. Yeah, there's the first question, which says, I noticed that so far 3 countries have subscribed. Are discussions ongoing with other member states? Is the contribution based on shown interest, or should we contact them ourselves first to ask them to take part? So as I explained before, the 3 countries which are shown here, Germany, Norway, Luxembourg, have pre-authorized, so there is no need to get back to the delegates. But for industries in all other member states, there is the need to go directly back to the delegates and ask them if they are interested to support this call, and of course specifically your company. Then there's a question, how frequent and granular is data for CO2, CO, H2S, NO2, NO, O3, SO2, and VOCs? This is a question that I need to address to my colleague, Tony, and now I have to see how I can bring him back online. 1 second. So, Tony.
Okay. Yeah, it's Pascal speaking.
Yeah, no, but Pascal is with me. You can answer that question.
Okay. Please go ahead.
You good? Okay, I was not sure you were online. Sorry. Okay, then the question is about the granularity of the existing data sets right now. On the Climate Office, we've been working on producing global maps of CO2 methane, and there are other projects working on global maps of of other greenhouse gases. Otherwise, there are many, well, not many, but there are quite a few products being made available, but mostly in the past. For what concerns the future, we have new satellites that are being launched and that will provide this type of information. But for more details, I would think you should go to the, I would suggest you go to the CCI website, the Climate Change Initiative website, which is cci.esa.int, and that you contact us for the more technical answers if you want.
Okay, Pascal, I guess this concludes your answer to this question.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so then I mute you again. The next question, we are incubated in an ESA BIC. Can we still apply? And if yes, are we allowed to use the funding on our time, not allowed in ESA BIC incentive? So, we have applicants to our program which have been in ESA BICs before. One of the questions is, what is the overlap between the activity that you carry out currently in the ESA BIC, and what is the activity that you intend to carry out in our activity? So it's not possible that you use funding from the ESA BIC to as the co-funding part for this activity. So the co-funding part of this activity has to come from another source than the ESA BIC, because otherwise you would use two ESA funding sources, and as such the ESA funding would not be limited to 75%, but would become 100%. I don't know if this answered the question. Otherwise, I would like to ask to rephrase another question in the chat room. Next question. Are there any special requirements on the legal status of the applying company, the persons, for example? The requirement is that it has to be a registered company within one of our member states. Next question. Does submission of proposal require ESA Star account? I have a MacBook and ESA Star does not support Apple. So the first point is yes, it requires an ESA Star account. On the second point, unfortunately, I have to pass, and this would need to be taken up with our experts in charge of ESA Star. However, I will take this as an action item and come back to this point individually or as a clarification to the call when we open it. Just making a note on this one. Next question, are you able to distribute the slides after the WebEx session? Yes, the slides will be made available to all the participants of this WebEx session. Next question, could a company located in a member state that is not funding the specific thematic be a subcontractor to a party that makes a proposal who is an eligible country? And if yes, can the subcontractor be named in the proposal? So this is about the mix of contractors of different countries. That's a tricky question, because typically we see that the applications that we have received so far are from single companies and normally not from consortia. So we have not been confronted with this issue so far. The question, I believe, is on the amount of money that is spent for the subcontractor. So if this is a minor part, then we would assume that it would be covered under the prime contractor. If it's, let's say, 50-50, so 40K, 40K, or ESA funding 30K, 30K, then we would assume that this needs to be covered by the individual national delegations. But as I said before, member states which are not listed here in as the three that have pre-authorized does not mean that they are not supporting this call. What's the definition? Next question, what's the definition of an SME or a startup? Here we follow the definition of the European Commission. So SME definition is quite clearly defined there. It's separating between or differentiating between micro companies, small companies, medium companies, micro companies up to 10 persons, 1 million turnover, medium companies, 50 persons, 10 million turnover, no, small companies, 10 persons, medium, 10 million turnover, and medium companies up to 250 people, and I believe 40 million turnover. Startup refers to the typical startup definition. In our case, as I said already before, it has to be a registered company within our member states. Next question is subcontracting to a research and technology organization possible? Yes, you can involve any company that you need to tackle the subject as such. However, the activities are not about the development of activities. They are about investigating the technical feasibility and the commercial viability. Therefore, the development part is not expected to be a major point. Of course, if you intend to have some proof of concept, this could be done, for example, also with mock-ups where presentations or screenshots or whatever can be presented to users, customers, but it's not expected that there are any developments of algorithms or other type of things. This is typically reserved to the demonstration project afterwards. But of course, if you need a research organization for specific know-how that is required to set up the service, then certainly this makes sense. Next question, will proposals related to distributed solar power generation in urban areas be considered? Maybe I would like to refer this question back to Tony and Pascal. And I unmute Tony now. Tony,
can you repeat the question, Robert? The line isn't so good that we could clearly hear.
Okay. Will proposals related to distributed solar power generation, photovoltaic, in urban areas be considered?
If the question's related to, for instance, siting of power distribution lines or, let's say, large-scale solar panels, like in a solar farm, and the business depends around variability in solar irradiance that might be expected in the coming, 10 to 15 years, then I would say yes. So providing that they can prove the relevance to climate change and also, of course, the importance of creating a viable business, then in principle, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. I suggest if this doesn't answer the question, maybe you can rephrase the question and put it again in the chat. Next question, the development of a proof of concept, is it considered desirable or is it a must? It depends, because at the end of the study, you should be able to give a clear information on the technical feasibility and the commercial viability. So that for a follow-on demonstration project, an informed decision can be taken if it's worthwhile to invest in this. And the investment will be done by the different stakeholders. This includes typically the national delegations, us as ESA, you as a companies, and maybe any other party that is co-funding on your side. So which means whatever is needed to come to this informed decision at the end can be done in the activity. If this includes a proof of concept, because certain technical aspects are not clear, then of course it makes sense to include. It's not a must. Then next question, probably also to Tony and Pascal. Will or are there high spatial resolution data, 10 centimeters or better, terrain and building databases, spaces of urban areas available for the presentation of a technical concept? And I unmute Tony and repeat the question. So will or are there high spatial resolution terrain building data, 10 centimeters or better, available on urban areas for the presentation of the technical concepts.
Okay, that's it's a tricky question, I would say. I think not. Well, we do have projects working on this type of on the urban areas, but it's not related to the climate office activities. I will not be able to answer directly like that.
I mean, ESA itself wouldn't make that data available to you, but of course, if you're able to acquire it yourself, then yeah, that would be certainly relevant to include. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tony and Pascal. I mute you again. In case this answer was not clear, then maybe you can rephrase the question. Next question. The focus appears to be on small companies and startups. As a subsidiary of a large company, do we stand a chance? So the point is, the focus is on SMEs, but our call is written in a manner that every company can apply. However, of course, in the specific country, the discussion needs to be done with the national delegation that is in charge of our programs here, and this question needs to be discussed with the national delegation. So if they are supportive, then certainly we will include this into the evaluation. Next question. May the contractor use a subcontractor that is a company for some of the tasks? Does the contractor have to name the subcontractor and the amount of money he will give for these tasks? Yes. So, as I said before, we have a very simple financial table which only includes 4 or 5 fields. One of these fields is called external service. And there, if you include a subcontractor, this has to be put under the line external service, and then information has to be given who this external service provider is, how much money will go to this, and in which task this organization will be involved. Next question, is it possible to partner with universities for this program? As I said before, yes, it's possible. However, the question should always be, is the information or the contribution these university can provide relevant to answer the question at the end if the concept is technically feasible and commercial viable. It's not foreseen that these activities are research activities. They are foreseen to prepare commercial sustainable services. So it's a business development approach. Next question. Does the application need to be limited to the scope of work within the 60,000 euros? Does it need to describe the complete potential project of which the feasibility study is just a work package? I think I have 2 answers to this. First, the feasibility study is not just a work package, it's an self-standing activity to prepare commercial sustainable services, which can be followed up by other activities like a demonstration project. So this study and the proposal is already organized in 3 dedicated work packages. The first work package says user requirements, so you have to talk to users and customers and investigate first the need and the business potential. The second one is called technical feasibility. In this work package, it needs to be investigated and the question answered if there is a technical system that can provide a service that solves the need of the customers. And the third work package is viability analysis, business plan, which has to dig into the commercial aspects. So these are the 3 elements, and there is a compliance statement expected. So if you want to add additional tasks to the predefined work packages, you are free to do so perfectly. And with this, the second part of the question should be clear. The first part of the question, does the application need to be limited to the scope of work within the 60,000 euro? The scope of the activity, the financial scope is 80,000 euro, not 60,000 euro. So the application needs to be limited to this scope. It cannot be that this 80K activity is a sub-element of a larger research or development project and plugs into this. It has to be a self-standing activity with 25% co-funding from the applicant. Next question. Does the activity have to use only satellite data? The answer is no. What we typically see is the integration of different type of data resources. So the typical approach for, let's say, activities which are involving Earth observation data is that Earth observation data provide the high-level information on large coverage base, but some data have limitations in terms of resolution or in terms of timely availability, and therefore additional data sources might come in. This might be UAV, ARPAs, so remotely piloted aircraft systems, unmanned systems, drones, whatever you like to call it, or in situ networks to complement the data sources from space. So typically we see a mix of data from different type of sources, but it can be also only satellite data. Next question. Are drones and improvement of drone operations for aerial observations also part of the scope of these thematic calls? I think I partially touched this already with my answer to the previous questions. So this means drones can be one part of the solution, but certainly the development of the drone itself is not subject of our activities. We are aiming for the implementation of services. But of course, if your drone, for example, needs to include the satellite communication component and we don't have it, then this is certainly an aspect that can be done. But if you want to develop a complete new drone, this is out of the scope of these activities. Next question. May the external services be for a party that is not located in the eligible countries? Or does the external service provider have to provide letter of support from the national delegation? So, in principle, service providers can be from any country. However, we would expect that this aspect is addressed with the national delegation in the coordination with them. Does the external service provider have to provide letter of support from the national delegation? As I said before, if this exceeds a certain amount of collaboration, then certainly yes, the other delegation should be contacted as well. So for example, as I said before, if there is let's say 50,000 euro are with the prime and 30,000 with the subcontractor, and the subcontractor is from another country, then this should be investigated with the national delegation of the subcontractor. At the moment, I see one final question. What ground-based climate data is available from ESA? And I put this question forward again to Tony and Pascal. So I repeat the question. What ground-based climate data is available from ESA?
Okay. ESA has no ground-based climate data. If you mean data, in situ data or drone or etc. What we have is space data, but we don't have in situ ground-based data.
Okay, thank you very much, Pascal. Okay, thank you very much, Pascal. I think the answer was clear. So we got another question. In case of a successful application, when can the project be started? As I said before, the call closes mid-January, 16th of January. We expect to have the evaluation within 4 weeks after closing of the call, and the contracts to be sent to the companies within 6 weeks after the TEB, the tender evaluation board. This would mean 10 weeks after closing of the call, mid-January, mid-February, mid-March, and March, which means activities would be expected to start, let's say, beginning of April, 1st, 2nd April, depending what weekday this is. Other question, if you want to address a market outside Europe, could be a subcontractor from a non-European country? A very good question, because this also touches one point that has not been said before. So targeting markets outside Europe is a high interest of our delegates. So export opportunities are typically well supported by our delegations, and we also see that especially for companies in smaller countries, their own home country is not big enough to support a specific service. Therefore, export is certainly an area that needs to be taken into account for any type of space-based service. Then the question, could be a subcontractor also come from a non-European country? Certainly, yes. So this would be then also to be shown under external service provider. So we have reached the end of the list of questions. Let's say we give another 30 seconds in case someone wants to submit a question, and otherwise I think then we are close to completion of this webinar. I thank you all very much for the interest in this topic, for the submission of the questions, which are all very helpful, and I think we answered almost all of the questions, except for the one with the Apple MacBook, which we have to come back to, sufficiently for you to apply to this call. In case you have any further questions, you are always free to address the questions also during the opening period to the contracts officer, which is shown in the cover letter of this tender. The process typically works in the way that you submit the questions in writing, and answers will be published as clarifications to the call, so that every interested applicant has the same information and knowledge as all the others. So like we did here, where everybody could hear what the answers to the questions are. Good. We have not seen any further questions, so with this I will then conclude this webinar and wish you all a very nice day. Thank you very much and goodbye.